So blood supply, um, go in and out. Make sure you know it's ARI, AIA, glomerulus, and epiair. Okay. And we already passed that. This is the aorta, renal artery, interlobar artery. This is between the lobe, and then arcuate artery. So this will be arcuate artery. But in the arcuate artery, it goes into the interlobular artery, which is this thing right here, interlobular artery. Interlobular will branch into the afferents arteriole, into the glomerulus. And you can see here's the afferents arteriole, right? Interlobular, afferents arteriole into the glomerulus, out into the efferents arteriole. In this case, here's efferents arteriole into peritubular capillary. That's what that is. Coming back out is interlobular vein, arcuate vein, interlobar vein, and renal vein. Okay, so that's how note the blood supplies go in and out. So you need to know the order. And you can expect me asking you a question regarding to that. Show you a similar thing, and the key difference between cortical nephrons and juxtamedullary nephron. Long loops of Henle here, with juxtamedullary versus cortical is short, and the efferents arteriole give rise to these peritubular capillary. Notice the peritubular capillary, they're surrounding the tubule. So there is a relationship between whether secretion directly, contents in the peritubular capillary goes directly into the distal convoluted tubule, right? Or at the proximal convoluted tubule, when it actually get reabsorbed, it being reabsorbs and it take into the peritubular capillary. Show you the similar thing, arcuate, and that shows you again renal. Some people say segmented here. I won't use the segmented, but I will use this interlobar and arcuate, right? Interlobular is up there. All right, so let's go to a little bit more on physiology now. Urine formation is divided into three stages, you can see here: filtration, tubular reabsorption, and secretion. Okay. The first stage occurs here. It's between the glomerulus and the Bowman's capsule. Tubular reabsorption is occur here in the proximal convoluted tubule. And here, see, this is the efferents arteriole give rise to the peritubular capillary. And peritubular capillary, you can get secretion directly from here to here. And then the reabsorption from the peritubular, from the proximal convoluted tubule, it goes into the peritubular capillary. Okay. Here say that water conservation is the third. It's really, this part is the third. The water conservation is because this now is in the collecting duct, and if you have a lot of salt around here, by osmosis, water will come out and take the salt. Things like filtration membrane, you're supposed to know. Filtration membrane are the three layers fenestrated epithelial of the glomerulus. The red is the Bowman's, the red is the basement membrane. Okay, basement membrane you see here, and then you have your podiocyte, which is the visceral layer of the Bowman's capsule. Okay, now we don't need to go into what are the sizes that can pass through this filtration membrane, but definitely glucose can pass through, amino acid can pass through, okay, but protein cannot. Red blood cell cannot, white blood cell cannot, because by the holes here, hole size is about 70 to 90 nanomolar. So anything that is bigger than that cannot pass through. Okay. We're talking about red blood cell um, somewhere about 7 micron. So this is 10 to the minus 9. Micron is 10 to the minus 6. Okay. And because the basement membrane has proteoglycan gels, so then it's even cut out some smaller molecule. Um, Anything that is bigger than 8 nanomolar can pass through. And then, of course, the proteolyte also part of that filtration membrane. And so it cuts it off even more. So things usually are less than 3 nanomolar can pass it through. Otherwise, it will stop it. It prevents it. But one of the problems with someone who has chronic hypertension is that there is constant pressure that is pushed on this filtration membrane, and over time you can damage it. And so whenever you have a damaged filtration membrane, you can start seeing protein that is flowing into the filtrate. And the protein cannot be reabsorbed at the proximal convoluted tubule, that protein will end up in the urine. So we call that proteinuria. When you see proteinuria, suggested that the filtration membrane is damaged. And so here's the components of the filtration membrane. Again, nice, easy, what they're composed of: fenestrated endothelium, the basement membrane in between, and the podiocyte, which just forms as the visceral layer of the Bowman's capsule. And showed you again, afferents arterial is a bigger one, efferents arterial, fenestrated capillary basement membrane, and then you have these podiocyte. See that? All right, so similarly, you can see this fenestrated capillary, the basement membrane, the foot process of the Bowman's capsule. So that uses the filtration membrane. All right, so the most important thing here is, let's do a little bit about physiology. So the kidney function is to filter your blood, but in order for it to filter, it needs hydrostatic pressure. The pressure that you see when the heart started to pump out, systolic pressure you saw is 120 millimeters of mercury, right? When the heart contracting. And then when the heart relaxes, you still have about 80 millimeters of mercury for most people, okay, in the arterial system. And as the volumes of blood that is passing through different artery, right, and the artery has this elasticity that allows to expand and recoil, expands, recoil. We call it pulse, right? And this pulse is travel. You did a lab, I think some of you, my student, when they're in a lab, I should ask them to do the experiment to show you that the pulse, that pulse rate doesn't change as you go away from the heart, but the strength of the pulse does change as you go away from the heart. So the pulse in the carotid artery, for example, is much stronger than the pulse that you see in the radial artery. But you can feel it. You can feel it. And so typically by the time it reaches the arterial, there's no pulse at all, right? And the key thing here is that when it reached the glomerulus, there's remaining roughly about 60 millimeters of mercury. Okay. Now that's what drives the filtration pressure, if you will, the filtration. And so you have 60 millimeters of mercury that push it the fluid out. But opposing that, because here's this slide which shows you. So the hydrostatic pressure, right, in the glomerulus is about 60. Now, because there are protein within the glomerulus, that can also draw the fluids back in, right? This is known as colloosmotic pressure. And so your 60 now is opposed by 32 pressure, or roughly 30. And there is also a fluid in the capsular space over here. Now that fluid can pushes the hydrostatic pressure, pushes the fluid back into the glomerulus. So the 60 is opposed by these two pressure. So the net, we call it the net filtration pressure, is about 10 millimeter of mercury out. Now you see here, you have the hydrostatic pressure from the inside the glomerulus, push it out, and the fluid in the capsular space is pushing the fluid into the glomerulus. Now, because the presence of proteins in the glomerulus, it can draw fluids back in, and the general term is colloosmotic pressure. Now, why don't you have any colloosmotic pressure drawing the fluid out into the capsule? Why don't you have that? Why aren't there any colloidal pressure going this way? COP. Draw fluid into the Bowman's capsule. Does anybody know? Why isn't there colloidal? All right, so the question is, why aren't there any colloosmotic pressure draw fluid into the capsular space? Why don't you have that? Here you have it, right? But why don't you have it this way? Does anybody know? Where's everybody? I thought we had 23
Trying to figure out
students.
the answer to that question. I have no idea.
Huh?
Everybody's trying to figure out the answer to that question. I have no idea.
Oh, I see. Okay, good. Yeah, well, what is colloosmotic pressure? Colloosmotic pressure is composed of what? Right? In the blood, that colloosmotic pressure is albumin. Okay? The presence of albumin that draw the fluid back into the blood vessel in reabsorption. If you don't have albumin, you don't have that colloosmotic pressure. The fluid's going to stay in the tissue and you're going to get edema. We saw that, right? Okay, so the reason why you don't have any colloosmotic pressure in the capsular space is because there are no protein in the capsular space. There shouldn't be any proteins at all. If there's protein, then you have a problem. Okay. And that's one of the things is that if people have a damaged filtration membrane here, protein that can leave, then water can usually follow that as well. I mean, the fluid can follow that as well. And so that person who has glomerulus nephritis, for example, will have a lot of urine output, more urine output than normal. But note, so ultimately, your net filtration pressure is 10 millimeters of mercury, okay? But we wanted to figure out, okay, what is the rate of the glomeric filtration rate, okay? The glomeric filtration rate. In other words, we're asking, what is the glomerular filtration rate? So we're asking for how much can two kidney make, right, urine in a day, okay, or in an hour? What is that rate, or within a minute, okay? And so people will estimate that the glomerular filtration rate is certainly dependent on the net filtration pressure. So, oh, sorry. Um, Net filtration pressure. If you have no filtration, if the net filtration pressure is zero, you can't do any filtration. But if your net filtration pressure is higher, you're going to have higher uh, rate of filtration. Okay, does that make sense? So the glomerular filtration depends on the net filtration pressure. If the net filtration pressure increase, you're going to produce more filtration. If the net filtration pressure goes down, filtration ratio goes down. Okay, it depends on that. It actually, not only that, but people calculated that it depends on some coefficient, okay, some number. And this number based on the availability of the surface for filtration, all right, of all the filtration membrane from both kidneys, it's roughly estimated about 12.5 milliliter per minute for every millimeters of mercury. Okay, millimeters of mercury. For 1 units of pressure, right? It can uh, it can filter 12.5 milliliter per minute. Okay, and so what that means is that if you take 10 millimeters of mercury, right, times the coefficient, 12.5 milliliter per minute, okay, and the millimeters of mercury cancels out. Glomerular filtration, roughly about 125 ml per minute. Okay, that's a good number to know. Okay. Um, you can then, if you want, you can say, well, how much does the kidney produce? How much can a kidney filter within a day? Does anybody know? You know how to calculate it? If it's doing 125 milliliters per minute, how much can it produce in a day? Well, you can calculate it. 125 ml is equivalent to,
3,000 a day, right?
huh?
Would that be equivalent to 3,000 a day? 3,000 milliliters?
You're just guessing. Come on,
No,
calculate, dude.
no, I did the math. 125 milliliters. Oh wait, wrong number. Never mind. Wait, 125. Wait. Give me a minute. Give me a second. 125 milliliters. That's per minute.
Yes.
Oh shit. No, never mind. I don't got it. I did it by like hour. That's how I got that number. Never mind.
Well, it's
Was it a
easy
good
to
guess
convert
though?
it minutes to hours, huh?
Let's say I was guessing. Was it a good one?
No.
Damn. All right.
So let's say you time 60 minutes in an hour, right? And then times 24 hours in a day.
It's 180,000. No way.
A day.
A
Yes,
day.
but no, you're missing something else. You're missing a factor. Okay, now 125 milliliter is about an eighth of a liter. Do you believe that? Because you say 1 liter, what's a half of a liter? and a half of a half is a quarter, and a half of a quarter is an eighth, right? So this is say 0.5, this is 0.25, and this is 0.125. 0.125 liter is the same thing as 125 milliliter. Okay? So it's an eighth of a liter. So if you take this 8 liter times 1/8 of times 60 times 24, this goes into 3 times. So you're making 180 liter a day, roughly 200 liters a day. Okay? Now, do you void 200 liters a day? No. You'll void roughly about 2 liters a day. 2 liters a day. So what does that mean? That means roughly 99% of the filtrate get reabsorbed, taken back. So that even though the kidney make 180 liter of filtrate a day, but you only get rid of 2 liter a day. Most of that, 99% of it, it get reabsorbed. Okay. But this number is important because 125 milliliter per minute is our standard, if you will. So what happened when you say, okay, let's determine this person, an unknown, okay? And we say that we're going to infuse you with a substance that we can trace, okay? That substance is known as inulin. Now, inulin, well, renal clearance test. I'm going to talk inulins a little bit in the renal clearance as the ways to indirectly calculate the glomerular filtration rate. But let's say hypothetically, if someone who has glomerular filtration rate of 60 milliliter per minute, so in your mind, normally it should be 125 mL per minute, okay? We just take an average. Of course, bigger person, smaller person, male versus female. We just use it as standardized as the way of analysis. Let's say standardized as 125 a minute. And now you have a person who can only make about 60 ml per minute. What does that mean? What does that suggest to you? What do you think? Does anybody? I make 125 mLs per minute. You make 125 125 milliliters per minute of filtration, right? And here's a person who only can make 60 mLs per minute. So what's wrong? What's wrong with him?
Maybe they have a kidney problem?
Exactly. Of course he has kidney problem. He cannot make that high amount. So either he lost a kidney or half of the kidney is damaged, right? That's exactly what you do. You should think of, okay? But ultimately, what it does is that, well, it's hard to see. You know, even though you make 60 mLs per minute, he still can make 2 liters a day, right? And so if you just look at the urine output, you can't tell unless someone who's like really, you know, allegory, I mean, making no urine output at all, you can see, right? And so the way that we can do is we call it renal clearance. Let me ask renal clearance. Okay. Now, renal clearance is defined as the ability of the kidney to remove a substance from the blood. Okay, that's what renal clearance you should think of. Let's think of it. Let's think for a minute. Renal clearance is the ability of the kidney to clear the substance or to remove that substance for the blood. Okay. Now it depends on the substance. It's the substance that is, and every substance you should think of three things. Is this substance being secreted? Right. Sorry, let's do. For every substance, you should think of the three things. Is the substance being filtered? Most likely, yes. This substance being reabsorbed? Maybe, maybe not. Is this substance being secreted? Maybe, maybe not, right? And so those are the three things that you should think of: filtration, reabsorption, and secretion. Okay. Now, people know that renal clearance of glucose is zero, for example, right? So let's walk this through. Renal clearance of glucose is zero. Is zero. This means that the kidney cannot remove glucose from the blood unless you have very high level of glucose, right? So think of this. Glucose itself, can glucose be filtered? Yeah, it's small enough. It can go to the filtration membrane, right? Is glucose being reabsorbed at the proximal convoluted tubule? Yes. In fact, it reabsorbed completely. So even though glucose is being filtered, the kidney is actually taking it back up. Okay, it just receives it, so you see no glucose in urine. If you see glucose in urine, boom, dude, you have diabetes mellitus. Okay, you should never see glucose in the urine. Is glucose being secreted? No, not really. It doesn't. And so renal clearance of glucose is zero. Okay. Now, what happened is that we can trace the renal clearance of this guy right here if you infuse him with this substance called inulin. Okay. Now, the reason inulin is a polysaccharide that you get a lot from garlic, and we don't use inulins because it tastes good or smells good or it's color your urine. No, inulin, you can infuse it so that there is a certain concentrations of inulin in the blood. Okay, but we know that inulin is being filtered. It is being filtered. All right, but it is not reabsorb. It does not reabsorb. And it is not secreted. So all you have to do is, if you infuse the patient with inulin, right, and look at the level of inulin in the urine, right? So the people say, oh, renal clearance is defined as the concentration of inulin in the urine. Okay, what is that? Time, how much is the urine output does this person put out in a day? You give them a cup or something like that, divided by inulin in the blood. Okay? And you will see that by looking at the concentrations of inulin, you can come out to about 125 ml. Okay? So the renal clearance test for inulin is an indirectly way to tell us how much of what is the glomeric filtration rate. And if the glomeric filtration rate is 125 ml, assuming that that's how much it does in a minute, then the guy has renal uh, um, normal kidney function. If his renal clearance of inulin is only 60, right, ml, then he only can remove 60 ml. That means that half of the kidney. And in fact, people who have polycystic kidney disease, right, will have cysts in their kidney, and it's a genetic disorder, right? Genetic disorder, so that um, as a teen child, probably a boy typically in his teen years, up to 10, something like that, that'll be normal, because but then as you reach around 18 or so, there's going to have a lot of cysts, and cysts accumulate will damage the kidney. So you can look at his renal clearance goes from 125, right, ml. If it goes down to 90, okay, we call that end stage renal failure, stage 1. If it goes down to 60, that's end stage renal failure, stage 2, right? If it goes end stage renal failure, stage 3, if he only can clear 30 ml, so roughly, and about 15 ml, okay, that's the end stage renal failure. That's the prime candidate for um, to have kidney transplant or dialysis. Because if you now can only remove inulin 15 ml, right? You should be able to remove 125 mLs of blood clear of removal of inulin. But now you only can remove inulin only 15 mLs of blood, then you have a problem. Okay, that's what renal clearance is an indirectly way to tell you the glomerular filtration rate. All right, so why don't I'm going to stop here, take a 5-minute break. Anyone have any question?